Abigail used to laugh at everything, the sound of rain on the roof, the smell of new books, the way her mother Queen called her name when she forgot to wash the dishes. But one summer night, her laughter disappeared. No one in the small town of Ellington knew exactly why. They just knew that the bright, cheerful girl who once danced barefoot in the garden now walked with her head down and her eyes hollow. Her mother asked questions, but Abigail only said, "I don't want to talk about it." Her father Nolan thought it was teenage mood swings. Only her brother, Aaron, looked at her differently, quiet, guarded, like he knew something she didn't. Over the years, the silence grew thick between them. Abigail stayed out of the house as much as she could, working late, reading alone, avoiding the world. Every time Aaron walked into the room, she flinched, not out of fear, but from something deeper. A memory she couldn't explain, something she had buried so far inside that even she could barely touch it. One night, years later, Queen found Abigail sitting in the kitchen long after midnight, staring at the old family photo on the wall. In it, they looked happy, Nolan's arm around Queen, Abigail and Aaron standing in front, smiling. But Abigail's eyes in the photo felt like a lie. Queen poured her a cup of tea and sat beside her. "Abby," she said softly, "you've been carrying something for years. You think I can't see it, but I can. Whatever it is, you can tell me." Abigail shook her head. "You wouldn't understand, Mama." Queen reached out and held her hand. "Try me." Abigail looked at her mother, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, her lips trembled as if she might speak. But then Aaron's voice called from the hallway, "Mom? You still awake?" Abigail froze. Her hand slipped from Queen's, and she stood up quickly. "I'm going to bed," she whispered, rushing out before her brother entered the room. Queen watched her go, her heart aching. She didn't understand, not yet, that her daughter wasn't just running from pain. She was running from a truth that lived under their own roof. Later that night, Nolan came home from his night shift. He kissed Queen's forehead and noticed her worried eyes. "She's not talking again?" he asked. "No," Queen said quietly. "And Aaron, something strange about the way he looks at her. Like they share a secret I don't know." Nolan sighed. "Kids keep things, Queen. It's normal." But Queen shook her head. "This isn't normal. Whatever it is, it broke her." Upstairs, Abigail sat on her bed, staring at the moonlight through her window. Her hands shook as she opened her old diary, the one she had locked away for years. The pages smelled like dust and old tears. She flipped to the first blank page and began to write, the words falling out like blood from a wound. "He said it was our secret. He said no one would believe me. And I believed him." Her pen dropped to the floor. For years she'd tried to forget. For years she'd let silence protect the person who took her childhood away. But now, as the truth finally bled onto the page, Abigail whispered through her tears, "I can't keep this secret anymore." The next morning, the sky over Ellington was heavy with clouds. Abigail woke up feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes burned, her throat was tight, and the old diary still lay open beside her, the words staring back like open wounds. She thought about tearing the page out, maybe even burning the whole book. But instead, she closed it and slid it under her pillow. Some secrets, she told herself, were safer in ink than in memory. Downstairs, Queen was humming in the kitchen, making breakfast. Aaron sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, not saying much. When Abigail walked in, their eyes met for a second, and that 1 second was enough to make her whole body tense. Aaron quickly looked away. "Morning." Abigail's voice was barely a whisper. "Morning." Queen smiled awkwardly, sensing something she couldn't name. "You two used to talk so much," she said lightly. "Now it's like strangers live in my house." Aaron shrugged. "People grow up, Mom." But Abigail muttered under her breath, "Some people just forget what they did." Aaron's spoon froze mid-air. "What's that supposed to mean?" Abigail looked up sharply. "Nothing." Queen frowned. "Enough, both of you. I'm tired of this silence and tension. Whatever happened between you two, fix it. Family doesn't keep walls this high." Abigail forced a smile, stood up, and walked out without another word. Aaron watched her leave, guilt flickering across his face, or maybe fear. Later that day, Queen decided to clean Abigail's room. It wasn't her habit, but something in her mother's heart whispered that her daughter was hiding something, not a mess, but a truth. She folded clothes, dusted shelves, straightened the bed, and that's when she felt something hard under the pillow. She pulled it out slowly, a small brown diary. It was worn, edges torn, the lock broken. Queen hesitated. Her hands shook. She knew it was wrong to read it. But she also knew that sometimes a mother has to choose between respect and rescue. She opened the diary. At first, it was normal, small things, school notes, poems, little frustrations about life. But as the pages turned, the words grew darker. Until she reached the last one. He said no one would believe me. He said it was our secret. And I believed him. Queen froze. Her fingers went cold. Her breath caught in her throat. The handwriting was shaky, but there was no mistaking it, it was Abigail's. Her mind raced, who was he? What secret? What had her daughter been forced to carry all these years? That night, Queen confronted Abigail gently. She found her sitting in the backyard, staring at the sky, lost in thought. Queen sat beside her, silent for a moment, before whispering, "I read your diary." Abigail's face drained of color. "You what?" "I'm sorry, baby," Queen said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I had to." Those words, they broke me. Abigail turned away, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't have read it." "I had to," Queen said softly. "I'm your mother. If someone hurt you, I need to know." Abigail's lips trembled. She looked like she wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. But she only whispered, "It doesn't matter anymore. It was a long time ago." Queen grabbed her hand. "It does matter. You were a child. Whoever did this, they need to answer for it." Abigail shook her head, eyes full of pain. "No one would believe me then, and no one will now." "Try me," Queen said fiercely. Abigail looked at her mother's eyes, loving, trembling, desperate. And then, in a voice that cracked under the weight of years, she whispered two words that shattered Queen's world. "It's Aaron." The night fell silent. Queen blinked, stunned. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. "Abby, what did you just say?" Abigail's tears fell fast now. "It was Aaron, Mom." Queen stood slowly, backing away like she'd been struck. Her voice shook. "No, no, that can't be true." Abigail covered her face, sobbing. "He was different back then. I was little. He said it was a game, and I—" "Stop," Queen whispered, her body trembling. "Please stop." But Abigail couldn't. The truth was pouring out now, years of pain that couldn't be contained anymore. Queen staggered back into the house, her mind spinning, her heart breaking. Inside, Aaron was sitting on the couch, watching TV. He looked up as his mother entered, his smile fading when he saw her face. "Mom, what's wrong?" She just stared at him, at his face, his eyes, his calmness. Her voice came out cold, shaking with disbelief. "What did you do to your sister?" Aaron froze. His eyes widened. The remote slipped from his hand. "Mom," he whispered. But Queen wasn't listening anymore. The truth had already started to rip their family apart, and it was only the beginning. Queen didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding like it was trying to escape her chest. Every word Abigail had said echoed in her ears. "It's Aaron." She couldn't make sense of it. Her own children, the same two who once played in the backyard together, who shared birthday cakes and fought over toys, now connected by something so dark, so impossible to believe. When Nolan came home late that night, she was still sitting in the dark. He flicked on the light, surprised to see her awake. "Queen, what are you doing up?" She didn't answer right away. Her voice was dry when she finally spoke. "Nolan, how much do you really know about Aaron?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "He's our son." Queen looked at him sharply. "Is he?" Nolan blinked, confused. "Of course he is. Why would you ask that?" "Because," Queen said softly, "I think something terrible has happened. And I need the truth, all of it." Nolan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Queen, I don't know what you're talking about. Aaron's my son." But she cut him off. "Abigail says Aaron hurt her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Nolan's expression froze. The color drained from his face. "She what?" he whispered. Queen's eyes filled with tears. "She told me everything tonight. It happened years ago. She was just a child." Nolan sank into the chair beside the bed, his hands trembling. That can't be true." Queen's voice broke. "Do you think I want it to be true? Do you think I can believe it?" But I looked in her eyes, Nolan. She wasn't lying. He buried his face in his hands. "Oh God." After a long moment, Queen looked at him again. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there? Something about Aaron." Nolan didn't look up. He just sat there, silent, his breath shallow. "Nolan," she said again, this time firmer, her voice trembling with fear. "Tell me the truth." When he finally spoke, his words were like stones falling into an endless well. "Aaron isn't mine." Queen's world stopped. "What?" Nolan looked up at her, eyes full of regret. "He's not my son. I found out years ago. Before Abigail was even born." The room seemed to tilt. Queen could barely breathe. "You lied to me." "I didn't know how to tell you," Nolan said quickly. "You were pregnant with Abigail, and everything was falling apart. I didn't want to lose you too." Queen stared at him in disbelief. "So whose child is he?" Nolan hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Your ex. The one you told me never to mention again." Queen's blood ran cold. "You mean Caleb?" He nodded. She stood, her knees shaking. "You mean Aaron and Abigail, they..." Her voice broke. Nolan looked at her, helpless. "I didn't know, Queen. I swear to God, I didn't know." But she wasn't listening. The truth had hit her like a storm, brutal and merciless. Aaron wasn't Nolan's son. Abigail and Aaron weren't fully related. They shared the same mother, but not the same father. And neither of them had known. Down the hall, Aaron sat in his room, his head buried in his hands. He'd overheard every word through the thin walls. The truth he'd been running from his whole life was finally crawling into the light, and it burned. He remembered the night all those years ago, the confusion, the guilt, the way Abigail had cried afterward. He'd buried it deep, convincing himself it was a dream, something that had never really happened. But it had. He stood up, pacing, his breath uneven. She wasn't supposed to find out, he muttered to himself. No one was. Then, almost whispering, as if to convince himself, "It's not my fault. It's not my fault." But deep down, he knew it was. And now the truth was spreading through the house like wildfire, a truth that would destroy everything. The next morning, Queen called Abigail downstairs. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, but her voice was steady. "Abby," she said softly, "we need to talk." Abigail hesitated. "Is it about Aaron?" Queen nodded. "It's about everything." Abigail's stomach turned. "Did you tell Dad?" Queen swallowed hard. "I had to. And he told me something too, something you need to know." "What?" Abigail whispered. Queen's voice broke. "Aaron isn't your father's son." The room went silent. Abigail stared at her mother like she'd been struck. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Queen said, tears running down her cheeks, "that the man who hurt you was your brother only through me." Abigail stepped back, her world spinning. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "That means the person who destroyed me is my blood." The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a courtroom, cold, quiet, and waiting for someone to break. Abigail sat in the living room, her knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on nothing. Her breathing was steady, but her soul was screaming. Every corner of the house carried a memory of her childhood, her laughter, Aaron's voice, her mother's songs in the kitchen, all of it now tainted. Every echo felt like betrayal. Queen stood by the doorway, watching her daughter with trembling hands. She wanted to reach out, to hold her, but she didn't know if she had the right anymore. "Abby," she whispered finally, "you haven't eaten all day." Abigail didn't move. "I'm not hungry." Queen took a step closer. "Please, talk to me." Abigail's voice came out flat. "Talk? You want to talk now?" Her eyes lifted, cold, hurt, unrecognizable. For years, I was drowning, Mom. I was losing myself, and you kept asking me to smile. You told me I was strong, but you never asked why I was breaking. Queen's lips trembled. I didn't know, baby. You didn't want to know. The words hit like a slap. Queen stepped back, tears spilling down her cheeks. That's not fair. No, Abigail said softly. It's not. Nothing about this is fair. Upstairs, Aaron sat on the edge of his bed, hands gripping his head. His reflection in the mirror across from him looked like a stranger, eyes hollow, face pale. He'd been rehearsing the same sentence for hours. I'm sorry. But it sounded empty every time he said it. He remembered being 17, confused, angry, desperate to belong. Abigail was the only one who made him feel safe. She listened when their parents fought, laughed when he felt invisible. And that night, he ruined it all. I didn't mean to, he whispered to his reflection. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But his reflection didn't flinch. It just stared back at him, accusing, silent, cruel. That evening, Queen gathered the courage to go to Aaron's room. She didn't knock. She just opened the door and stood there. Aaron looked up, his face pale, his eyes swollen from crying. Mom, he started, but Queen raised her hand. Don't, she said quietly. Don't call me that right now. Aaron's throat tightened. Please, I need to explain. Explain what? She snapped, her voice trembling. That you took your sister's childhood. That you made her afraid of her own shadow. Tears filled his eyes. I was young, confused. Don't you dare use that as an excuse. Queen's voice broke into a sob. You were old enough to know what pain was. You were old enough to stop. Aaron looked down, his shoulders shaking. I wish I could take it back. Queen's eyes softened, but only for a second. You can't, she said bitterly. Some things don't go away, Aaron. They live in the people you hurt. For a long moment, the room was silent except for their uneven breathing. Then Aaron whispered, almost to himself, she hates me, doesn't she? Queen's voice was tired, hollow. No, Aaron. Hate would be easier. What she feels for you is worse. It's the kind of silence that doesn't heal. That night, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, until the whole house felt like it was crying. Abigail sat by her window, watching it pour, her thoughts spinning like the storm outside. Her mother's sobs echoed faintly down the hall. Her father's footsteps paced back and forth. And somewhere, behind another closed door, Aaron cried too. But she couldn't find sympathy anymore. She opened her diary, the same one that had started everything, and wrote one line under the final page. The truth is heavier than the lie that hid it. Then she closed the book. Somewhere deep inside her, forgiveness and fury were fighting for space, and neither was winning. The storm outside had passed, but inside the house, another one brewed. Nolan sat in the garage, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the oil-stained floor. The smell of gasoline mixed with damp air and regret. He hadn't spoken to anyone since last night. Queen stood in the doorway, arms folded tightly, as if she were holding herself together by force. You said you didn't know about Aaron, she whispered. That you didn't know he wasn't yours. Was that true? Nolan didn't look up. Her voice grew sharper. Don't lie to me again, Nolan. I've been lied to enough for one lifetime. He sighed, a long, heavy sound that seemed to come from his bones. At first, I didn't know. But later, he swallowed hard. Later, I found out. Queen's chest tightened. When? He hesitated, staring at his hands. Before Abigail turned 10. She blinked, stunned. You've known that long? He nodded once. The air between them turned cold. You watched them grow up together, she said slowly, voice trembling. You let them eat at the same table, call each other brother and sister, and you said nothing. I didn't know what to do, he said quietly. How do you tell a little girl her brother isn't really her brother? How do you tell a woman the child she loves came from another man? You could have told me. Queen cried, her voice cracking. You could have trusted me. I tried. Nolan shouted suddenly, his voice breaking under the weight of years. I tried so many times, Queen, but every time I looked at you, I couldn't. You were already fragile back then. You'd lost your father, you'd just found out you were pregnant with Abigail. I didn't want to destroy what little peace we had left." Her tears fell fast. "Peace built on lies isn't peace, Nolan. It's a slow death." He looked up at her then, eyes filled with guilt, pain, and something else. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I buried the truth deep enough, it would die there. But it didn't die," she said, her voice breaking into a whisper. "It lived in this house, in our walls, in our children." Nolan dropped his face into his hands. "I know." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rainwater dripping from the roof outside. Finally, Queen asked the question that had been clawing at her chest since Abigail's confession. "Did you ever notice, Nolan? The way she looked at him? The way she changed?" He nodded slowly, shame heavy in every movement. "I noticed. I thought it was just fear. I told myself siblings fight, they drift apart. I didn't want to believe there was more." Queen stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You didn't want to believe, or you didn't care to believe." That broke him. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I cared too much. That's why I lied. That's why I stayed silent." She shook her head. "You stayed silent because it was easier. Because truth demands courage, and you didn't have any left." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "You're right." The admission made her chest ache even more. She turned away, covering her mouth with her hand. All those years, Abigail thought no one saw her pain. She thought her silence kept this family together, but it was our silence that broke her. Nolan's voice trembled. "I thought love was enough." Queen wiped her face, her voice quiet now, but every word sharp as glass. "Love isn't silence, Nolan. Love tells the truth, even when it burns." That night, Queen went into Abigail's room. Her daughter was sitting by the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the stars. "Mom," she said softly, without turning around, "I know you talked to Dad." Queen's throat tightened. "He told me everything." Abigail nodded slowly. "Then you know." "I do," Queen whispered. "And I'm so sorry." Abigail turned to look at her, eyes swollen but strong. "Sorry won't fix it, Mom. Nothing can." Queen sat beside her, touching her hand gently. "Maybe not. But I want you to know something, none of this was your fault. Not one piece of it." Abigail's lips trembled. "Then why does it still feel like it is?" "Because pain doesn't leave when the truth comes out," Queen said softly. "Sometimes, it just changes shape." They sat there in silence, two broken hearts trying to find warmth in the cold truth that had finally come home. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Inside, the mother held her daughter close, as if she could shield her from the past. But some storms, Queen knew, don't pass. They live inside you, and you just learn to breathe through the rain. The house was silent when the clock struck midnight. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain outside filled the air. Abigail sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes unfocused. Queen sat nearby, holding a rosary that had long lost its meaning, and Nolan stood by the window, staring out like he expected the darkness to give him answers. Then footsteps came from the hallway. Slow, hesitant, dragging. Aaron. He looked different, not older, but emptier. His eyes were red, his hair messy, his body slouched as if carrying something too heavy to bear. Queen stood first. "Aaron." He raised a trembling hand. "Don't, Mom. Please. Let me talk." No one moved. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "I can't keep pretending," he said quietly. "Every day, I wake up with the sound of her voice in my head. Every night, I hear the silence that I caused. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, it would fade. But it doesn't. It never does." Nolan stepped forward cautiously. "Aaron, no one is asking you to." "Yes, they are," Aaron interrupted, his voice shaking. "You're all waiting for me to say it. So I will." He took a deep breath and looked at Abigail. The pain in her eyes made him look away. "I broke everything that mattered," he said softly. "I hurt someone who never deserved it. I ruined your childhood, Abigail. I made you live in fear. I can't take it back, but I can stop hiding from it. Abigail's voice was quiet but sharp. Why now? After all these years? Aaron's jaw tightened. Because I found out who I am, who my real father was. I spent my whole life wondering why I felt different. Angry. Lost. And when I found out the truth, I realized I was born from a lie. From someone else's betrayal. And I became exactly what I hated. Queen covered her mouth, tears falling silently. Nolan's hands were shaking. Aaron, you can't. Aaron shook his head. I have to. I can't live like this anymore. I see her face every time I close my eyes. He turned to Abigail again, tears glistening. I don't want forgiveness. I don't even deserve to be looked at. But I need you to know that I remember every single day. I'm sorry doesn't mean anything, I know that, but it's all I have left. Abigail didn't answer. Her eyes filled, her lips trembling. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the rain hitting the windows. Finally, she whispered, You destroyed me, Aaron. He closed his eyes. I know. And you still get to breathe. That broke him. He turned away, his shoulders shaking, his sobs quiet but raw. Queen stepped forward, instinctively wanting to hold her son, but her hand stopped mid-air. She didn't know how to comfort him anymore. Nolan's voice cracked. Where will you go? Aaron wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. Somewhere far. Somewhere I can't hurt anyone anymore. Abigail's voice rose, fragile but fierce. Running doesn't fix it. I'm not running, he said softly. I'm giving you peace. Queen's knees weakened. Aaron, please don't do anything stupid. He gave her a sad, broken smile. I'm not. I just can't stay in the same house as the people I've destroyed. He walked toward the door. No one tried to stop him. The sound of rain swallowed his footsteps as he stepped outside. Queen collapsed into Nolan's arms, sobbing. Abigail sat frozen, staring at the empty space where her brother had stood. It didn't feel like relief. It didn't even feel like justice. It felt like grief, slow, quiet, endless. Hours later, Abigail found herself by the window, watching the streetlight flicker through the rain. Her reflection stared back at her older, lonelier, broken but still breathing. She whispered, almost to herself. He left, but the pain didn't. Queen came up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Some storms, she said softly, don't leave when they're over. You just learn how to walk through them. Abigail turned to her mother, her voice shaking. Will we ever be okay again? Queen looked at her daughter, her eyes full of sadness and love. I don't know, she said truthfully. But I know we'll try. Outside, the rain began to slow. Inside, the family sat together in silence, not healed, not whole, but honest for the first time in years. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. Queen pulled Abigail closer, her arms trembling. Some holes aren't meant to be filled, Abby, she whispered. They just remind us where love failed. For a long time, neither of them moved. The rain outside had stopped, but the air still smelled like thunder. Every drop that slid off the roof sounded like a heartbeat fading away. When Abigail finally stood, her eyes were red and swollen. She looked at the window, it was still open, the curtains fluttering like someone waving goodbye. Do you think he'll ever come back? She asked. Queen didn't answer right away. Her voice was tired, heavy. If there's still a little light left in him, maybe. Downstairs, Nolan sat at the kitchen table, staring at his own envelope. His hands were too rough for paper that soft. The words blurred as he read. Dad. You tried to raise me right, even when life didn't make it easy. I'm sorry for what I've done, for making you carry my guilt too. Please take care of Mom and Abigail. Don't let my shadow stay in the house longer than it needs to. Aaron. Nolan folded the letter slowly, pressing it flat like he could smooth out the hurt too. Then he slid it into his wallet and wiped his eyes. Queen came down the stairs quietly. She saw the untouched coffee pot and 2 empty mugs. You read it? She asked softly. Nolan nodded, his jaw tight. He's gone for good this time. Queen sat across from him, resting her letter on the table between them. He said not to look for him. I wasn't going to, Nolan said. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. He's a grown man. If I find him, I'll break. If I let him go, I might survive. Queen looked at her husband, the man who had always tried to keep the world steady, and for the first time in years, she saw him small, just a father who didn't know how to save his son. That night, Abigail went out in the rain. She wore Aaron's old hoodie and stood by the oak tree where they used to play as kids. She buried her feet in the wet grass and whispered to the sky. You said you'd never let anyone hurt me again. You lied. The wind didn't answer. Only the rustle of wet leaves and the echo of her own sobs filled the air. When she turned to go back inside, she noticed something shining by the roots of the tree, a small metal chain tangled in the mud. She bent down and picked it up. It was Aaron's necklace, the one with the tiny silver cross. Her breath caught. He had been here before leaving. She clenched the pendant in her fist and whispered, "You can run, Aaron. But your ghost will stay here with me." Later that night, Queen stood in the doorway of Abigail's room, watching her daughter sleep. Abigail was clutching the necklace in her hand, her face damp from crying. Queen turned off the light and whispered to the darkness, "Please, God, don't let this be the end of him. Don't let this be the end of us." Downstairs, Nolan sat alone at the kitchen table again, staring out the window. The moonlight caught his reflection in the glass, a broken man staring back. He whispered to himself, "I lost one son years ago. I can't lose the same one twice." The rain began again, light at first, then heavier, washing away the footprints on the driveway. But the pain stayed. And somewhere far away, Aaron sat in a dark motel room, staring at a picture of his family on his phone, Queen smiling, Nolan's arm around Abigail, the world before it shattered. He touched the screen like he could feel them through it. Then he whispered to himself, "I'll come back, when I'm not the monster they remember." He turned off the light. And outside, thunder rumbled again, quiet, distant, like the sound of a secret refusing to die. Aaron had been gone for almost 2 weeks. He didn't tell anyone where he went, not that anyone was asking anymore. He drove until the city lights disappeared behind him, until the roads grew narrow and the trees pressed close, whispering in the wind like they knew his secret. He found a small cabin for rent near a lake, quiet, forgotten, the kind of place where even pain seemed to fade into the mist. But it didn't. Every night, he dreamed of Abigail's face, not the frightened version of that night, but the one from before. When she'd still laughed at his jokes, when she'd trusted him. And then, always, came the look of horror, the way she'd stared at him like he was a monster. He'd wake up shaking, whispering, "I didn't know. I didn't know." But the mirror in the small bathroom didn't believe him. He'd stare into it for hours, the reflection of a man who looked so much like his father, Nolan, but with colder eyes. He wondered what Nolan had seen in his own reflection after the truth came out. Sometimes Aaron spoke to himself, because silence was worse. "You're her brother," he'd whisper. "You didn't know. You couldn't have known." But another voice, the one that never let him rest, whispered back, "You didn't have to know to destroy her." One afternoon, while trying to keep his mind busy, Aaron walked to a small grocery store near the edge of town. The woman at the counter, gray hair, gentle eyes, smiled as he paid for coffee and bread. "You new around here?" she asked. "Just passing through," he said. "Well," she smiled kindly, "some people run to something. Some run from something. Either way, the road won't fix what's chasing you." Her words hit him like glass. He didn't reply, just left the money on the counter and walked out into the wind. That evening, he sat by the lake, watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the water. It was beautiful and cruel at the same time. For a moment, he saw Abigail's face in the water, crying, then gone when the wind stirred. Aaron whispered, "I'm sorry, Abby. I didn't mean for any of it." But the water didn't forgive him. It just kept moving. Back home, Queen sat by the window every night, waiting for a sign. She hadn't told Abigail that she'd started writing letters to Aaron, not to send, just to release the ache. One of them read, "Dear Aaron, you were my boy, no matter the blood. I wish love alone could have saved you from what life made you carry. I wish forgiveness was easier. But maybe, one day, we'll all meet again and this time, the truth won't hurt as much." Abigail found one of those letters accidentally and read it in silence. For the first time, she didn't cry. She just stared at the words, realizing her mother's pain was different, quieter, but just as deep. Later that night, Abigail dreamed of Aaron. He stood on the edge of a lake under a dark sky, holding something small and shining, the cross necklace she'd found. He said, "You have to forgive yourself before you forgive me." When she woke up, her pillow was wet with tears. Meanwhile, back in that lonely cabin, Aaron found something strange tucked deep in his mother's old box that he had taken before leaving, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. It was a birth certificate. His name. His mother's name. And beneath it, written faintly in ink, "Father, unknown." But below that, in handwriting that looked like Nolan's, someone had written another name and then scratched it out so hard the paper tore. Aaron stared at it for a long time, his chest tightening. There was something his mother, Queen, hadn't told him, something even darker behind this truth. He whispered, "What else did they hide?" The rain began again outside, soft but constant, like footsteps on the roof. And for the first time since leaving home, Aaron felt something he couldn't explain. Not peace. Not guilt. It was fear. Because maybe forgiveness wasn't what haunted him anymore. Maybe the past wasn't finished speaking. Aaron couldn't sleep. The lake outside his cabin shimmered in the moonlight, calm on the surface, hiding everything dark below. The old birth paper lay on the table beside the lamp. The scratched-out name drew his eyes again and again until he finally reached for it. He tilted it toward the light. Under the heavy black lines, faint curves of letters began to appear. He could make out parts of a word, C-A-L-E-B. His heartbeat stumbled. Caleb. The name belonged to the man his mother once mentioned only in whispers, a man she said was a mistake the world would never forgive. Aaron sank into the chair, the truth crawling over his skin. "Caleb," he whispered. "That means." He stopped himself, unable to finish the sentence. If Caleb was the name under the ink, then the darkness running through this family didn't start with him. It began long before any of them were born. That same night, miles away, Abigail stood in the kitchen pouring herself a glass of water. She hadn't slept either. The house creaked softly, like it remembered every voice that had ever shouted or cried inside it. On the counter sat the cross necklace. It caught the moonlight and flashed once, like a pulse. She picked it up, pressing the cool metal to her chest. "Why can't you leave me alone, Aaron?" she whispered. But in her heart, she knew he hadn't come back to haunt her. He wanted her to see something. She opened the drawer where her mother kept family papers. There were letters, bills, and an old photograph folded in half. When she smoothed it open, her breath hitched. It was Queen, younger, holding a baby. Beside her stood a man who wasn't Nolan. His eyes, sharp, familiar, belonged to Aaron. Back in the cabin, Aaron's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You deserve to know the rest. Ask your mother about Caleb." No name, no location, just that one line. He froze, staring at the screen until it dimmed. The wind howled against the window like someone whispering his name. "Who are you?" he muttered, typing back. No answer came. He looked again at the torn paper, then folded it carefully into his wallet. His mind raced. Queen had written to Caleb before Nolan ever knew about it. If that was true, then Abigail's pain was born from a lie that belonged to the parents, not the children. The realization cut deep. He whispered, "We've all been paying for their secrets." Morning came gray and cold. Queen sat in the living room, clutching her mug, when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Abigail holding the photograph. "Mom," Abigail said quietly, "who is this man?" Queen's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "It was in your drawer." Queen took the picture with shaking hands. That's Caleb. The one who..." Queen nodded slowly. "Before I met your father, I thought Caleb loved me. But he hurt me in ways I never told anyone. When I found out I was pregnant, I ran. Nolan found me and said he'd raise the baby as his own. I thought hiding it would protect everyone." Abigail's eyes filled. "Mom, that means Aaron." "Yes," Queen said, her voice breaking. "He's Caleb's son." Abigail backed away, her breath catching. He found out. Queen nodded again, tears spilling. And now he's gone because of it. They stood in silence, the truth echoing between them. Far away, Aaron packed his things. The air outside smelled of rain again. He slipped the folded paper into his pocket and whispered to the empty room. Maybe I wasn't born to destroy. Maybe I was born to end the lie. He started the car and looked once more at the lake, the reflection of the sky trembling on the surface. For the first time, he didn't see guilt staring back, just a boy who wanted peace. Then he drove toward home. Back in the house, Queen and Abigail sat at the table, the photo between them. Queen whispered, "He's coming back, Abby. I can feel it." Abigail looked out the window where the first drops of rain began to fall again. She nodded, voice soft but certain. "I hope he does. Because this time, we need to finish the truth." Outside, thunder rolled over the horizon, gentle but growing, as if warning them the storm wasn't done yet. The morning Aaron came home, the sky looked soft and broken, the way it looks after a long storm. The clouds had begun to clear, the wet air heavy with the smell of earth and forgiveness. He parked the car at the end of the driveway, staring at the house that had once been everything and nothing to him. The windows were open. Curtains moved in the breeze. It looked alive again, as if it had been waiting. Aaron sat for a moment longer, gripping the steering wheel. His heart was loud in his ears. He whispered to himself, "It's time." When he finally stepped out, the sound of gravel under his shoes was soft but sure. Each step felt like a confession. He knocked. The door opened slowly. Abigail stood there. For a few long seconds, they didn't speak. Her eyes searched his face, reading every line, every tired breath. His hair was longer, his face thinner, but his eyes, those same haunted eyes, hadn't changed. "Hi," Aaron said quietly. Abigail swallowed hard. "You came back." He nodded. "I had to." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." The house was quiet but not heavy this time, more like it was listening. Queen was in the kitchen when she heard his voice. The cup in her hand slipped and shattered on the floor. She turned and saw him. For a second, she didn't move. Then, as if her heart made the decision before her mind, she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. Aaron froze, then broke. His body shook as he held her, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Queen pressed her face to his shoulder, crying softly, "You came home. That's enough for now." Abigail stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly. She watched them, emotion flickering across her face, love, pain, confusion. Finally, she spoke. "We all lost something, Aaron. But I don't want to lose the rest of us, too." Aaron turned to her, eyes full of tears. "I don't deserve that." Abigail took a step closer. "Maybe not. But forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something we choose for ourselves." They sat at the kitchen table for hours. No shouting. No hiding. Just the truth, plain and bare. Aaron told them everything, what he'd found, what he'd learned about Caleb, and how he'd finally realized that his silence had come from shame, not evil. Queen listened, tears streaming quietly. When he finished, Queen said softly, "Caleb was my mistake, Aaron. But you were never one. You're my son. You always will be." Aaron shook his head. "I'm his blood." She smiled weakly. "Blood doesn't make family. Love does." The words broke him again. Abigail reached across the table, her hand trembling, and placed it over his. He looked at her, uncertain. She whispered, "I still don't know how to forgive you. But I want to learn how." Aaron nodded, his voice cracking. "That's all I could ever ask." That night, they sat outside together, Queen, Abigail, Nolan, and Aaron. The rain had stopped for good. The air was clean and cold, the stars faint but visible. Nolan lit a small lantern, and its glow danced across their faces. For the first time in years, no one hid behind silence. Queen leaned her head on Nolan's shoulder. Abigail sat close to Aaron, not touching him, but near enough to say she didn't hate him anymore. The night was quiet. Then Aaron whispered, "Do you think the storm's over?" Abigail looked up at the sky. Maybe. But even if it comes again, we'll face it together this time. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in years. Together. Queen closed her eyes and whispered a small prayer, not for the past to disappear, but for it to stop ruling their hearts. At sunrise, Aaron walked to the oak tree where Abigail had once found his necklace. The ground was soft from rain, and sunlight slipped through the branches. He knelt, pressing the small silver cross into the earth. "This isn't about forgetting," he said quietly. "It's about finally letting go." Behind him, Abigail's voice came softly. "You don't have to do it alone." He turned. She was standing there, arms folded, a small smile on her face. He stood up. For a moment, they just looked at each other, not as broken people, not as enemies, but as survivors. Then, for the first time, Abigail said, "Welcome home, Aaron." He smiled, tears in his eyes. "It's good to be back." They stood together under the morning sun. The wind moved through the trees, gentle, forgiving, carrying away the last echoes of the storm that had once nearly destroyed them. And for the first time in years, the house at the end of the road felt like home again. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that we're never truly alone. This is I Told Stories. Stories from the heart. Stories for the soul.